Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. I know some of us are still getting some drinks at the bar, but thank you so much for joining us tonight for Forget Fast Fashion. This is such an awesome crowd, and I'm really looking forward to this event in celebration of Earth Month and Earth Day at the end of this week. Tonight, we're going to hear from some of the pioneers leading the eco-fashion revolution. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our moderator this evening, Miss Diana Kapp, who's also the author of this awesome book, Girls Who Green the World. Diana's a friend of the Battery. She brought her last book, Girls Who Run the World, to the Battery pre-COVID. I think it was 2019. And so this book is set to release on Friday for Earth Day. She does have some advanced copies in the back of the room for sale if you are interested in purchasing that. We're live streaming tonight, and we'll do a Q&A towards the end of the hour, so you can start thinking of your questions. And then I'll just kick it over to Diana. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you, Colleen, and thank you to the Battery for having me back. I was here, as she said, in 2019, and at that time, I had written a book about female entrepreneurs and inventors and creators, and I wanted to show young girls that anything was possible. And I was sort of following along with my young daughter, who at the time was 12, and as I always said, she popped out with her hands on her hips, kind of ready to issue orders. And I wondered if the world was ready for her. And this book, I've continued to follow along with my kids. So I now have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. And they are really, really focused on the climate. And they're angry, they're sad, they're scared. So it was really the first time that I'd given a lot of thought to how much our young people are experiencing those feelings of hopelessness and overwhelm. And I actually just wrote an article about climate anxiety and, learned that it's a real phenomenon that is going in the DSM. It is a survey of 10,000 youth around the world that was published in the Lancet in 2021. Asked the youth, how many of you agree with the statement, humanity is doomed? And 56% said they agreed with that statement. So that sense of sort of inevitability is not surprising, but it's not what we need our young people to be feeling so that we can all activate towards change. And so this book is really a hopeful take on all the really interesting activism that's happening, some amazing science, incredibly creative takes on plastic alternatives, waste reduction, sustainable food, clean energy, and of course, tonight we're going to talk about sustainable fashion. And the heart of sustainable fashion, or what makes it not sustainable, is this industry of fast fashion, which we'll talk about. And of all the things that I learned about for the book, it's really got some of the most unnerving statistics and practices. And I'll just run through a couple of them to sort of set the stage before I introduce these three amazing people you're going to get to hear from. So fashion is the world's second most polluting industry, beaten only by oil. Around 20% of global industrial water pollution is traceable directly to the textiles industry. Apparel is the second largest user of the world's water, just behind agriculture. It's responsible for 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. Most of our clothes are produced in China, Bangladesh, and India, which are largely powered by coal. 63% of textile fibers are derived from petrochemicals. The average American throws away 80 pounds of clothes annually. And globally, just 12% of the materials used for clothing end up being recycled. And we're now buying about 60% more clothes, each of us on average, than we did just 15 years ago. So you can see we've got a hot mess going on that needs attention. And there are many dynamics that make this industry, turning it around and make it more sustainable, really tricky. So we're driven by this highly consuming culture and a need for sort of ever faster style turnover. We chase trends, then cheap production happens in places where there's no regulation over pollution and labor. The competition drives prices to the bottom, so make it difficult to produce things in the United States, and on like that. So we'll talk about some of those things. So tonight we are joined by Jamie Bainbridge. I'll go one by one through these guys. So Jamie is, she is the Vice President of Product Development at Bolt Threads, and she joined there in 2016. Her past experience includes research and development and innovation work at Nike and Patagonia, and Director of Product, Textiles, and Sustainability for Now Clothing, NAU, which was one of the first performance brands focused on sustainable textiles. She oversees the creation of Milo and is responsible for its high quality, softness, and drape, and ability to take on any color or emboss. And Milo is a type of leather, unleather, as they call it. And she is ensuring that the product feels and looks just like animal leather. Michelle Zhu, is that how you say it? Michelle Zhu, I actually met through one of my writer friends, Poe Bronson, and he has now done the unlikely path of moving from being a novelist to a venture capitalist. And IndieBio is his incubator, and they are lucky enough to be incubating Michelle's company, which is called Huue. And she came up through the strategy and business operations at Deloitte and then Yelp. And she's got all kinds of accolades. She's a Forbes 30 under 30. The company Huue was deemed by Time a best invention of 2021. And they had the challenge of kind of getting everything up and going, and then having the pandemic hit, and then they had to close their labs down, and now they're really rocking and rolling again. Can I just ask you guys at the bar, it's really hard for me to hear, and I'm hearing a lot of clanging. I don't know if there's anything you can do. Thanks. And Jessica Landsberg is currently a student at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a number of us here are graduates of that program. And I learned about Jessica from my friend Viva, who is part of the Stanford Fashion X program, which is a program in sustainable fashion. And it's pretty encouraging to think that they even have such a program going on. She's a first year at Stanford. And they invited Jessica to speak, and we're really impressed with her. And I looked Jessica up before I was going to get on Zoom with her, and I bonded with her immediately because I learned that her first entrepreneurial venture was a candy by the pound business, which she ran on the campus of WashU. And I'm a real fan of candy. And so we had a lot of conversation about our favorites, and we could have talked all day just about that. She calls herself a retail nerd and has interacted with the retail industry as a McKinsey consultant, an intern at J. Crew and other brands in New York City. She worked retail in her youth, and she was always one that was willing to work on Black Friday because she actually found all the excitement of being in retail actually fun. And now she has founded her own company, Pareto, and with a McKinsey colleague. So she's getting that business. It's been going since 2020. And she still decided to come out to graduate school to kind of make some of the kinds of connections that she needs to make to take it to the next stage. So I like to start on panels by just warming everyone up with like really quick lightning questions. So just go in this direction, just fast. So some of these you did for the book. So Jamie, something that you are surprisingly good at.
Parallel parking.
How about you, Michelle?
Identifying the voices of female pop artists.
Ooh, that's a good one.
For me, I'm weirdly good at ping pong. I'm the youngest of 4, and my brother would like force me to play growing up. So that's always my party trick. I surprise people that I'm actually really good at that random skill.
Okay, now let's go this direction.
Darn, I was excited that it was starting on
You were
that
last.
end. Yeah.
Okay. What's something you're surprisingly bad at?
Oh. But you can't then like test me on
I'm
it.
not going to test you, I
Okay.
promise.
Geography. Putting states on a map, it's really hard for me.
Grim. How about you?
This one's so hard.
She's just good at everything.
No. This is actually going to be fly in the face of kind of sustainability, but my family always makes fun of me. I can't ever finish the last bite of food on my plate for some reason.
Passwords.
Oh,
They're my nemesis.
bond with you on that. Okay, a habit I'm trying to break.
Oh, sugar all the time.
Yep.
Staying up late and waking up late.
How about you? Bad habit.
I like forget to eat, which is also a really bad habit. Like I like don't eat at proper times, and it's not good. I need to eat more.
And then the
regularly.
candy comes.
And then
the candy
exactly,
comes out.
and then I'm like, oh, I can eat sugar.
Okay, and the last one, what is the source of environmental news or information that you read that we all should too?
I find that I actually get it from maybe not so BOF, the Business of Fashion, I think is a really great, credible source that covers a bunch of things, and their environmental articles, I think, have the least amount of greenwashing, which I'm sure we'll probably hit on in a bit.
How about you?
I subscribe to like a regular Washington Post kind of climate newsletter, sort of a daily one that I like.
Yeah, I agree. One that I've read for years is Green Biz.
Okay, thanks, you guys. And I just want to make one more note before we go on, which is we have in the audience some young participants in a program that I absolutely am crazy about, which is called Girls Crushing It. And it is very young entrepreneurs learning how to develop ideas, iterate ideas, start businesses. So I'm really excited to have all of you in the audience tonight. Okay, so why don't you each go one by one, and maybe Jamie, you start, and just quickly give us a few sentences about what your company does and what is the big problem you're trying to solve.
Okay. Bolt Threads is a biotech company started by a bunch of bioengineers, and it really is looking to solve the world's problems through inventing better materials. So we started the company working on a biotech version of spider silk, and now we've moved on to this leather product that is made of mushroom mycelium.
So Huue is also a biotech company. And so I have several different kind of threads of connection to the kind of panelists here, which is really exciting. But we are using biology to create the next generation of color. And so if you think about color, dyes, and pigments in, the clothes that you wear, right? Specifically, we're starting with the indigo in your blue jeans. But color is also incorporated in the food that we eat, the paint on our walls, and we are basically eliminating kind of the usage of fossil fuel dependency, right, in kind of color production, and sort of detoxifying, moving away from the traditional, not just fossil fuels, but also toxic chemicals and heavy metals that are typically used in the kind of color production process.
And can you just tell us a little bit about the jeans industry? Like, how big is the blue jean dyeing industry, and how many blue jeans do we make, around the world each year?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's kind of the fun thing, right? Is like we're talking about color. Our company is sort of going after the rainbow, but also even just sort of the first color alone that we're producing, indigo for denim, it's just sort of hitting this, wardrobe staple, ubiquitous item that we all of us, right, have probably several pairs of in our closet, and we use and love every day. The interesting thing about denim is that it has kind of come under fire and come to be known as sort of this poster child for challenges in sustainability and fashion. And I think part of that is because it's a super large industry where you have, I think it's something in the range of like 2 to 4 billion pairs of jeans made every year. But also the production process is extremely complex. And so a lot of that, there's just a lot of kind of wastage, chemical usage, kind of, energy usage that comes through the very kind of complex processes that are required for making and processing your jeans.
I'm reading a book called Fashionopolis, which is actually really a great book. And I don't know if this is correct, but what she says, the author of this book, says that at any given time, 50% of the world is wearing blue jeans, like at that moment. Okay. Jessica.
So I am the co-founder of Pareto, and we are a women's apparel brand that's making getting dressed the easiest part of your day, both from a shopping perspective and then also from a styling perspective. So we make those true wardrobe essentials, super versatile, extremely durable. We like to say the Patagonia for everyday clothing. And then help you optimize your closet. So when you look at your closet in the morning, you don't have to think about how to style it. You get styling recipes based on the Pareto pieces you actually own. And then I think from what the problem we're trying to solve is that sustainably made clothing, responsible clothing, should be table stakes, and it shouldn't be a reason to buy from a brand anymore. And it's more than just how clothing is made, it's also the quantity of clothing made. And to be a responsible brand, you need to be able to address both of those. And so from a quantity perspective, really focusing on what are the pieces you actually wear. And then from how clothing is made, the need for traceability in the industry. It's not just the cut and sew factory, but it actually starts with the farm. So we have a fully traceable farm to closet domestic supply chain for all of our pieces that really allows us to make the most responsible decisions at every single stage of the supply chain.
And tell us what the name Pareto means.
Yeah. So it kind of just shows how nerdy I am, and also my co-founder Olivia is. So Pareto is named after an economist who died many, many years ago, who's famous for his work, the Pareto principle, which is that 20% of things account for 80% of the outcome. In his case, it was around land ownership. But for us, a huge aha moment and catalyst for starting Pareto was that after spending a ton of time in women's closets, we found that women wear 20% of their closet 80% of the time. And so we're really focusing on and just making those items that are in everyone's 20%. So the t-shirt dress, for example. And that 20% is actually pretty similar if we were to go around the room, even though we're all from different places, have different jobs. We all reach for that denim jacket, that t-shirt dress, that blazer. And so the 20% is exactly what we're focusing on.
Cool. Thanks, you guys. Okay, so Jamie told me a couple of good stories when we talked for the book that show us like how she came up in this field of getting interested in making her own things and sewing. And that is something she did as a child. And then she had sort of a very pivotal conversation with her dad that helped her continue on that path. So tell us a little bit about what you did as a kid and what you did to your mom's comforter and that night playing pool with your dad.
Yeah. Well, I grew up sewing and making things. I think I'm just driven to work with my hands. And so I've always loved it. the story about my mother's quilt is I designed a down jacket for myself, but I didn't know where you could buy down. I was probably 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. And I thought, that quilt on my parents' bed. And so I snuck up there and I removed a little bit of down from each one of the quilt lines and stuffed my jacket with it and quickly sewed the quilt up. She knew. Yeah, the conversation that I had with my dad, it was a very pivotal conversation in my life. I got a degree in forest mycology, which is the study of fungal diseases of the forest. And it's very strange that I've come full circle that way. But I was working in that field and I was hating it, absolutely hating it. And so my father said, come on, we're going to go down for a beer at the pool hall down here and shoot some pool. And we shot a game of pool and he said, okay, I want to talk to you about something. I want to tell you that you're not very good at what you're doing right now. And what you're actually good at is something you may not realize. You're incredibly good at thinking through three-dimensional problems and making things. And you can figure out anything with cloth. So why don't you go do that? Because it makes you happy. And I quit my job and I found an amazing job with a company in Seattle. And I've been infatuated with working with textiles ever since.
Good story. So Michelle, you have a similar kind of upbringing story that led you a bit into the apparel industry. So just tell us a little bit about how you first got acquainted with blue jeans.
Yeah, so let me just say first that, our company is a deeply scientific kind of technology-based company. We have brilliant scientists, including a couple of our team members in the audience here today. And the technology was not invented by me. It is created and furthered by people much smarter than me, including my co-founder Tammy, who is basically the inventor of the technology, and we'd spun it all out from her kind of PhD work at Berkeley. And so you may be wondering how I sort of got into this whole thing, and especially with sort of like yes, I was sort of working in, business operations, management, consulting. I was sort of in this intersection of consumer and technology, but not necessarily directly here. Well, as it turns out, and as kind of Tammy and my kind of paths crossed, the reason I was so kind of drawn to her project is because my family was actually in the apparel space growing up. And so we are immigrants from China, moved to the US when I was 3. And there my parents started their own kind of suite of apparel brands out of Los Angeles, where I grew up. But of course, they were doing what they knew how to do, which was basically doing very traditional manufacturing out of China for the clothes that they were making. And so I grew up actually, spending a lot of my summer vacations seeing family in China and seeing denim factories in China. And so grew up, I would say, very close to the issue. It was very, real for me. I think a lot of young women grow up kind of and girls thinking about the fashion industry as a super kind of glamorous industry, to be in. And my impression were these, the just dirty factories and sort of water pollution that, just is a reality of, textile manufacturing these days. And so I think that is really what made me so drawn to kind of Tammy's technology and project, and really what made me want to kind of team up with her to found Huue.
And interestingly, Tammy did not set out to create a company or to develop a technology that was going to be an alternate, more sustainable way of making color. It sort of happened almost by accident. They were tagging cells and using color as a way to see what was happening, processes inside cells. And then they were seeing that they were producing Am I saying
Indigo.
this right?
This is exactly right. You got it. They were sort of
Okay.
thinking about color as sort of an indicator, and then it ended up being sort of inventing sort of this opportunity for making, indigo in this case, and now, is sort of transforming into a more platform opportunity for color. But yeah, didn't start this way. It was more so that they were doing this, and then there became some industry interest, and that was where, they started learning more about the needs for reform in the space, the sort of incredible demand for the market, and this is how it ended up kind of blossoming into what it is today.
Okay, so Jessica, you often talk about your company as being a farm to table apparel brand. And that's kind of a reference to this very opaque supply chain. And talk a little bit about why is the supply chain in the retail industry, so where the clothes are grown and then manufactured and finished, why is it so hard to understand where our clothes come from, and what is the whole issue of sort of the opacity of that supply chain?
So you can cut me off because I feel super passionate about this, so I could talk for like hours. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you guys probably know a lot of this. But just for some context, there's 5 key stages in an apparel supply chain. There's the farm in which the cotton's grown. There's the yarn spinner that takes the cotton and turns it into yarn. There's the knitter or weaver that knits it into a fabric. There's the dye house, which dyes the grayish fabric, so there's color. And then ultimately there's the cut and sew factory, which takes the colored fabric, cuts it, and sews it into your final piece. And a lot of brands that talk about their manufacture are really just talking about that 5th stage, that cut and sew factory. But so much happens beforehand. And your question around why brands don't have visibility into those 5 stages, it's because a lot of times every single one of those stages takes place in a different continent. I think the stat, it's always changing, but your average t-shirt travels 40,000 miles before getting to your closet, because the cotton could be grown in China, spun in Vietnam, dyed back in China. And so the footprint is just insane. And so many middlemen have popped up along the way, which further gets at just the inability to trace it back to each step. And so what's been interesting about this journey is that traceability, like we've already seen farm to table revolutionize the food space. And we're big believers that apparel's kind of 5 years behind the food space, and farm to closet is going to become finally like more well known across across everybody, and it's going to be something that consumers demand from apparel brands. And the interesting thing, and then I'll stop. The interesting thing is this farm to closet supply chain isn't just to make the most responsible clothing, but it also allows you to make the highest quality clothing, because there's quality decisions at every stage too, like the length of the cotton staple, it's the spin that you put on the yarn that impacts pilling. And so it really shows that responsibly made clothing and high quality clothing aren't at odds like a lot of the industry talks about.
And so when you're talking about having transparency, does that necessarily mean that it has to be made in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think something that is like super top of mind for us right now. For us, what's table stakes is a traceable supply chain. And to get there, we started our brand during the pandemic, and the easiest way to get there, and the way to get there with supply chain partners that we felt super confident about, was in the US. And so right now, our cotton farmers in Lubbock, Texas, and every single step is in the US. And I think that's something we think a lot about, is if we were to bring some of those stages of our supply chain abroad, how does that impact how responsibly made it is? And I think there's a lot of levers. So I think I'm not really answering your question, but I think that like it doesn't have to be in the US, but the US does make it easier on a lot of the dimensions.
Can I just add to
Yeah.
that really quick, just to, even add a little bit more kind of color on that point, which is like, for example, if Jess were ever to make kind of denim jeans and try to do kind of traceability all the way through, there are no denim dyeing facility mills in the US, period. So there is no way, even if that were her objective, right, for her to do that. And I think it's really important to understand it's not just about sort of like intention of the brand, but just like where the supply chain is today that you kind of have to work with in order to build.
Totally. And we're actually working with a dye house now in the Carolinas, and he used to do a lot of denim dyeing. That business obviously went abroad, and now he's super excited to get back into product development with us, and like does a lot of things we ask him. He's like, let me like do some R&D, because he wants to bring it back to the States. But yeah, he's like the only one.
So Jamie, let's talk a little bit about leather, and then we're gonna talk more about blue jeans. So I had written down this sentence from you in my book, which I just love. So she said, when it comes to leather, she says, once a tannery has got a dead cow in, then there's this hide covered with hair, which comes from the animal's backside, which is full of fat. And you have to take that putrefying hide and render it sterile, which means you need a hell of a lot of chemicals. Turning skin into leather requires massive amounts of energy and chemicals, including formaldehyde, coal tar derivatives. So tell us about, so that's like the bad way that we deal with leather. I just love that image of that.
Still
that
fond
piece
of your
hide,
handbag?
okay? So you can understand when you hear that, what would be the appeal of mushrooms. So tell us a little bit about how do mushrooms turn into leather, and how mushrooms are suddenly like the hottest thing going. We're talking about taking mushrooms. There was like an article about Bolt in the New York Times, and it said, Stella McCartney is taking mushrooms. So what is the fascination with mushrooms, and how do you make leather out of mushrooms?
Yeah. Well, first of all, how did we get started making mushrooms into leather? It was very much by accident, and it started with a company that were a bunch of friends of ours who make packaging. They take basically agricultural waste, and they grow these mycelium in the agricultural waste, and they make packaging for wine bottles and things out of it. And they had happened upon this very much by accident. They let it grow a little too long one day, and they said, oh, this feels soft like suede. And you can imagine what happened from there. So it was very much by accident. And we saw the potential in the project. They were very, very early stage with it and didn't want to take it any further. And we said, we'd love to do it. So I got to feel a piece of that material, and I couldn't believe how much it felt like leather. And I knew that we could get there from where we started. If you saw a piece of the first material, it's this kind of lumpy, warty, it's not very attractive. But there's something about the way the material moves and the way the material feels in your hand. It feels very much like a natural product. A natural product and a synthetic product feel very different from one another in some very unique ways. And a natural material will usually feel warm to the touch, and this one very much did. So we got to work on the project and figured out some ways to grow the material that made it pretty high efficiency for us. We figured out how to transform the material into the product. We figured out how to impart color to the product and then protect it and finish it. And we're just about to see that product come to the retail market. And the first company that, well, we had a launch earlier this year with Lululemon. They used our material as a trim on a bag. And now we're going to see the material in a handbag that Stella McCartney just walked down the runway a few weeks ago, and that will be coming to the retail market within the next few months. So, Stella McCartney has been an incredible partner to us. We could not have done what we're doing today without Stella. She worked with us on the silk project when we were working with silk fiber. She was a huge champion for it, and now she's working with us on this product. She is someone, I don't know if anyone here in the audience remembers who Stella's mother was, but she was an animal rights advocate. She was a lifelong vegetarian. She raised her children that way, and Stella still lives that way today. And she very much believes that raising of animals for food is the wrong thing to do, and she runs her company on those principles. So she's a huge champion of early innovation. She has incredible patience, and she wants to work with companies like ours to provide showcases for products as they're being developed. So she, the first product we did with her, we barely could put it on a mannequin, and you couldn't touch it with wet hands. And, it was incredibly delicate, but she put it up there and she gave us a platform for it. And so every step along the way, she has worked with us to help provide this platform. And she absolutely loves to be the first company in the market with an innovation that gets her further down the road to sustainability. And she's really leading the charge in the high-end luxury market, and willing to take far more risks than most of the big luxury brands who are quite entrenched in their leather business. Stella's never sold a piece of leather. She's used synthetic leather since day one. And she doesn't like synthetic leather anymore because it's all made of plastic. So this offers her a really good change in a direction that she very much believes in. So these champion companies that we've been partnering with have helped us to, do this very difficult task of bringing this raw material to consumers and bringing it to life.
She's also an advocate of female entrepreneurship.
Absolutely, yes.
Michelle, you have sort of a similar story of a champion that's in industry that has gotten involved with you. So first, paint a little bit more of a picture. So for people that don't understand what it looks like when you're growing dye in using microbes in a laboratory, and help them imagine what that is. And then talk a little bit about how you connected with an industry insider that's helped you kind of get it really going and become something real.
So, if you want to kind of contrast a little bit, right, history of color to sort of like current processes for making color versus how we're doing it at Huue with biology. So actually, if you really stop to think about it, thousands of years ago, color was always made from nature. It was made from plants and animals. You'd crush up the leaves of plants to to create the color, and it was an extremely laborious, expensive process. Royal purple got its name because it was literally worth more than gold. That was how difficult it was to produce, and it wasn't very kind of like high performing or pure. And so when the Germans invented basically synthetic chemistry and basically figured out how to create dyes from petrochemicals, everything changed. Dyes, among many other kind of petrochemical based materials, were very cheap, also very pure. And that's basically the majority, by and large, how kind of the industry is kind of working with color today. In contrast, we, as a biotechnology company in this sort of like wave of synthetic biology, this is why kind of companies like, Bolt and Huue get to exist, is there is this kind of, revolution, I would say, that is going on in this sort of synthetic biology field right now that basically is allowing us to go back to nature and kind of work with biology in a way that was never possible before. So what we do at Huue in terms of growing color is we basically look at nature's processes for creating color. So if you think about like, well, what are the enzymes within the indigo plant, right, that are responsible for creating indigo blue? We mirror that process and basically use bioengineering to program our own little microbes to be able to basically mirror that process from nature. And then once we kind of encode them with the instructions to do that, we can grow them up in these kind of large, fermentation tanks. So think of it as beer, right? And so if they just sort of feed sugar, grow in these large tanks, they'll directly secrete the indigo color, or the specific kind of color of interest in sort of the case of the rainbow of colors. So that in essence is kind of how we work with biology to create our cleaner sources of color. And in this journey from sort of taking that from Tammy's sort of like small lab scale process where she was growing the color in very small kind of benchtop bioreactors, and then kind of doing dyeing in her bathtub, that has since sort of transformed into growing and kind of scaling that process for us, and also starting to craft the kind of early partnerships to try to to start to bring this material into our closets. And so one of the kind of key allies that has been really kind of supportive in our journey to kind of get us there has been Adriano Goldschmied, who is one of our kind of industry advisors, and he is been named in other sort of contexts as sort of like the godfather of denim. He is sort of responsible for this sort of category of like premium jeans.
He's AG jeans, which you might know.
If you all,
Yeah.
and has been really great, just because he is not just sort of like a really well-known name in kind of the denim space, but truly he comes from the design, the production sort of background, right? And so understands what it actually looks like to sort of incorporate and work with our material. And so the sort of what we were doing, and the importance of indigo in the denim supply chain, all of that, the need for using it as this drop-in replacement into the supply chain, it was just all immediately resonated with him from our very first meeting. And so we felt very fortunate to have him as an advocate for us in the journey.
Exciting science both of you guys are doing. It's amazing what's happening. So Jessica, what I think is really interesting about your proposition, and really hard, is that you're going against kind of this basic consumption instinct that we all have, where we're keeping clothes for less time than it takes us to go through a bottle of ketchup. That's one of the things I talk about in the book. It takes us 6 months on average, we keep our clothing. And women wear things once or twice and they consider it old. And that's become worse in like the social media generation, where we're taking pictures in clothes and then we don't want to wear them again. So how do you think about how you're going to kind of have a concept that's based on minimizing consumption in a culture that is very much based on mass consumption?
Yeah, and I think you're totally right around this huge push for more product more often, but we're starting to see kind of glimmers of hope with the home edit, like Marie Kondo, even just the global pandemic, really making everyone take a step back. They're in the house full of everything they own and realize that actually more stuff doesn't make me happier. So I think that there's definitely this underlying trend in wanting to simplify. That's definitely happening. But for sure, there's a huge education piece for us. And I think for us, there's kind of two main ways we're really trying to change behavior. Is one around these styling recipes, we like to call it. It's like you can style your t-shirt dress in hundreds of different ways. And whether you put a denim jacket over it, whether you layer a sweater on top of it, that really make the piece look totally different. And I think a lot of times some people like to do that part of it, some people don't. And so helping our community think about all the ways in which they can wear the same piece but make it look totally different is definitely a behavior shift. And then the other one is cost per wear, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with. But it's more, what cost per wear is you take the absolute amount that you pay for a good, and then you divide it by the number of times you wear it. Which for the number of times you wear it, that is a factor of how long it lasts. So for fast fashion, maybe you wash it once and then you can't wear it anymore, but also how often you wear it. And so this framing of price actually really helps our community think about how much they own and how much they wear it. For us, we track our community's cost per wear of our pieces, and all of our cost per wear all of our pieces have a less than $2 cost per wear when you compare that to fast fashion, where it's closer to $15 per wear. And so quantifying it for them to really show the cost per wear, but then also giving them that qualitative styling inspiration has been really impactful to change their behavior.
You know, fun fact, in the Victorian era, the average woman owned 3 things. And if we always wonder why closets in old houses are so small, 3 things.
I was sharing with her. My grandmother used to teach me that. This is a coat from my grandmother that's at least 60 years old. And
There
she
you go.
always said, if you buy quality and you
That's
divide
right.
it by
That's a
the
long
times
time.
you wear it,
There you go.
it'll last you forever. So she's gone, but her coats are still doing well.
That's right.
That's a good thing to tell your husband too when you buy a really expensive item of clothing. So I'm going to ask both of you guys this question. So it's one thing to have these really incredible new ways of creating things in the laboratory, and it's quite different to produce these things on a scale that allows you to change anything kind of materially about the climate and, you know, the environment. And to fund that is very difficult to make it through the kind of time periods that it takes. So talk about some of the challenges of kind of being a business that's trying to be at the nexus of sustainability and fund it using venture capital largely, and make it through the kind of time frame that you need to make jeans in a big way, or be working for Adidas making, you know, leather for their shoes. So
yeah, it certainly is the challenge of what we're trying to do, to try and, you know, we started with a mission to make a material that was as sustainable as we could possibly make it. But we've got to get that material to the market before we run out of funding.
Yes.
And we have to be able to make enough of it that we can get it to the market, which necessitates a lot of changes in how we make it as we get bigger and bigger. And I think what you find is that the perfection that you were striving for to enter that market with, you're not going to be perfect the first time you go out there. And you're going to have to make compromises on one front or another. And the media is not necessarily nice about that. And so it really provides an interesting challenge to sort of run the gauntlet of all of these things and get through to the other side. And I think we're, you know, I'm very proud of the product we're bringing to the market. It is not perfect yet. It just isn't. We're dyeing it with synthetic dyes because she only makes indigo so far. But we're dyeing it with the highest exhaustion, best quality dyes that we possibly can. But it's something that the media has really asked us about. And so we're doing the best we can, and we're muddling through and hoping we make it to the other side while still having money in the bank. Yes.
I have a question. When you're doing the mycelium, do you have inherent natural colors that you don't when you don't have other dyes, or when you don't have to use indigo? Are there in the family of the mushrooms themselves? Are there shades?
With this particular organism that we're growing, it comes out about the color of a manila envelope. And so it is one color. And then we have to protect that. So we have to put a protective coating on it. Down the line, we have all sorts of things in the planning. But right now, that's the color would not be terribly attractive.
Can it be indigo?
Yes, it could.
Indigo.
Yes, it could. Yeah.
How about you, Michelle? And what are the trade-offs for you in running those big fermenting broths and the kind of energy inputs that are required? So are you coming out net ahead on environmental issues?
Oh, I appreciate that question. It's a little bit different than, yeah. Well, let me answer that one first, and I think it sort of ties to the broader theme that I was sort of thinking about in the kind of original question you were posing as well, which is, I do think a big part of this is that, perfection, right, can't be the enemy of progress. And that's just, it's so important whether you're talking about building a, new deep tech materials company or anything that we might be doing, especially when it relates to sort of like climate efforts. I think not letting the overwhelm of the doom kind of prevent us from taking any sort of like little steps. I think it's broadly applicable. And so for us, I think, with that question about, okay, well, what, how do you think about sort of like energy inputs and trade-offs sort of in the process of growing? That's actually, it's a tough one, right? Because actually, I'll give you one example. Is like when you are making the dye at a super, lab scale in a small lab quantity, the kind of nutrients you might be sort of feeding the microbe, for example, to kind of get it to grow, they're like the most expensive, rich media components ever, because you only need a super tiny amount of it. And, the UC Berkeley lab has tons of these nutrients. And so then it becomes sort of a question of, well, but then how do you kind of take that from sort of the little quantities to sort of like up, the large scale where it's something that actually can be sort of like fully manufacturable, but also how do you make sure that you're not kind of like, again, kind of sacrificing perfection, because there needs to be sort of like intermediate steps along the way. So maybe we are no longer using the most sort of like rich media, but we may be still using a more simplified but not fully kind of simplified form. And that might, come with some trade-offs, whether you're talking about price, whether you're talking about sort of like, resource considerations for those intermediate stages that I think just for us comes down to like, that's part of the process of building towards something larger. So we have to just take the steps. We have to be really transparent and open about where we are in the process in the meantime. But, it's in the service of kind of like the larger goal. But so, I would say that's sort of the broader point I want to make. I do think, one additional point is like that transparency piece is really, really important, whether you're talking about communicating to media, communicating to investors, communicating to brands and brand partners who, in a world of fast fashion, even if they want better materials, they also still want it yesterday. And so how do you educate the partners and the consumers about where we are in the process, how long it's going to take to bring these types of novel solutions into the market, and to hopefully give everyone a little bit of like hope and patience.
You don't do
is
what
a must.
Elizabeth Holmes did
No.
at Walgreens.
That is lack of transparency. Yeah.
So let's switch gears just a little bit. And Jessica, because you started, you're starting a company right now on your own, you're starting business school. Just tell us a little bit about what made you want to start your own company to do this, and what was it like when you were kind of sitting with your friend Olivia after a long week at McKinsey and kind of maybe a bitch session about how messed up retail is? How did that kind of land you where you are now?
Yeah. So I think I was definitely bit by the entrepreneurship bug with the candy store. That was really when I realized my love to build things and take something from 0 to not 100, but 0 to 80. And that the period in which you're really growing something was what excited me. So that was always kind of like eating at me on the inside when I was doing consulting and helping brands go from 90 to 91 and like those incremental changes. But in terms of kind of the catalyst to start Pareto, it honestly was very organic. Olivia and we were both serving clients Monday through Thursday, and then we'd be back in the office together on Friday and kind of just like complain to each other and talk about what we were seeing in the space and how it really just didn't make sense to us. And then from there, it led to just like whiteboarding what we think it should look like. And then from there, it was like, wait, I feel like we have a business idea here. And I think that organic process was, I couldn't imagine any other way. Like, I can't imagine being like, I want to start a company and then backing out the company you want to start. And so that was kind of the process. And then I think what really sealed the deal was one of my friends, Jimmy Kim, who Michelle knows. I remember when I was kind of thinking through really taking the leap and starting Pareto, he was like, well, is there another apparel brand you're excited to work for? And I was like, nope. And then that was kind of the answer of like, if I don't see something I'm super passionate about, I should go out and build something that I'm excited to work at, that I'm excited to buy from. And that really was what sealed the deal for me.
Do you two feel hopeful about the future of the apparel industry? It feels like really complicated to change. There's so many layers of the problem. So I'm just curious, are we talking about a shift that's going to take place over 100 years, over a decade? Maybe Michelle, start with sort of how do you think about where we're headed?
Well, one thing that makes me actually really hopeful is the rise of brands like Jess's. Is like it's, I think what she said is something that I also, often kind of say with our business is sustainability is becoming table stakes for the fashion industry. And I think that is driven by some of these new and emerging brands that, basically have to kind of start with thinking about sustainability as sort of a first principle, as a marker of luxury, and then is then forcing a lot of the kind of large players to have to respond to that and also make sure that, it's part of the way that they do things as well. And so I think the sort of alignment of incentives, for lack of a, for kind of a pessimistic word there, but because, good for the planet is more and more starting to be good for business. I think that is pushing brands, the fashion industry as a whole, to have to think about how are they doing things, what materials they are using, and that's kind of creating an opportunity for innovations to incubate and grow kind of in this environment. So,
and when you say it's table stakes, and you use that term too, are you talking about that customers really care about it, or are you talking about that the press is going to go after you if you're not being kind of responsible, or what is changing in terms of making it table stakes?
It looked like you wanted to answer.
No, go. we're probably going to go in the same direction anyway. So
I do think, I think all of those, and certainly it's not perfect, right? I understand the irony of like, you have a lot of new emerging kind of like sustainability talking brands. And also, there's a lot of things that can be said about, greenwashing, and we can have a whole conversation about that as well. And in parallel, you also have, brands like Shein kind of rising, and, it being costing like $2, right? For, and it's sort of like a even greater push towards kind of fast fashion, and there's sort of like that the pull in both directions there. But that being said, I think more and more so sustainability is becoming more and more kind of top of mind for consumers. That is creating the pull from the brands, and kind of as a layer on top of that, there is this sort of increased media pressure that I think still comes from social sentiment here, right? That means that you get glorified as a company that kind of starts as sustainability as principles first, and you get potentially at risk of being cut down as a company if you're not thinking about that.
What do you think, Jamie, on the time frame? And then we'll start taking some questions from the audience.
Okay. I think two things. First of all, the thing that's really heartening to me about it is if you were to go to a textile trade show today, the only innovation that is going to be displayed at that trade show has to do with sustainability. Nobody is marketing a whiz-bang cool thing that does not have some merit in this world. So that's the good thing, and that is changing very quickly. I've been working in this space since about 2006, and the change that I have seen over that time is phenomenal. And some of the brands that we think are doing nothing are actually doing an incredible amount to change what they're doing. So that's the good news. That change is happening fairly fast. I think the slower change, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, is exactly the one about, can we get people to consume less? Why do we think we need so much? And I think that's going to take a long time. But I'm hoping that the pandemic has changed all of us a little bit.
When I was researching the book, I did an interview with Annie Leonard, she's now the head of Greenpeace USA, and she also made this really amazing set of small videos, which you should watch if you have never seen them, called The Story of Stuff. And it's kind of like a very short explanation of what happens with capitalism and how it drives consumer culture. And I asked her, I'm going to be going around talking to all these young people in high schools and middle schools, and what would be the message that you would want to send to young people? And she said, I would make sharing cool. Yes. And it was just all about, and at the root of everything is kind of this idea that we just have to start consuming less. And that's driving so many trends in terms of, rental and upcycling and the renewal, all these brands creating renewal lines. And, there's a lot going on that's hopefully pushing us that direction. Is there some questions for the audience, from the audience? And just let us know who you're directing it to.
Hi, thank you very much for your really interesting and informative discussion. It's really heartening to see 4 women up there. And I often think about, I heard this saying that dogs don't care if you're black, yellow, blue, what nationality, whatever you are. And I just wanted to ask you, in terms of being women in business and being in where you started, in everything from trying to raise money, do you feel that it's been more difficult being women in this business? Particularly, I was thinking like venture capital fundraising, but in other aspects of the business, have there been any challenges?
Well, just to give like a tiny background on it, right now, the venture capital funding that goes to women-run startups is only around like 2 to 3% of all the venture capital dollars. So it's a very, very small portion. But I think there's a lot of new pressure to change that. And I mean, what do you guys think? You haven't yet
Okay.
had to go out and fund because you're still self-funding,
Yeah, but we're starting that.
starting the journey.
Okay. I will take this because that's the kind of see. Yeah, I am the point person for the company, kind of doing this. Yeah,
In a fundraise right now.
we are in a fundraise at the moment, kind of hopefully on the rounding the corner on it. It I've learned so much through the process, especially in the early days. I think there were a lot of these kind of conversations about kind of like the gender dynamics, and got a lot of coaching actually about, and it isn't just thinking about my identity as a woman, but it's, that intersectionality of being an Asian woman. What are some of the ways that we might be kind of socially conditioned to communicate and act that is actually antithetical to how you're expected to communicate and act in a fundraising process. And so got a lot of coaching, and this is really just sort of like open kind of story and lesson sharing, but got a lot of coaching early on about, hey, you need to be pitching a much bigger vision for the company, and the financial projections that you are sharing needs to be much bigger, much sooner, because the guy I saw right before you just 10x the projections that you were showing in the same kind of time frame. So just to sort of like, maybe normalize or validate that, like, that stuff is real and that does happen. And I think a lot of the learning for me as an entrepreneur has been trying to just figure out, okay, well, how much of the game do I want to play, right? How much of it sort of truly makes sense? Should I push myself a little bit more to kind of think about, hey, let's not just the conservative case that we know we're going to hit, but also like the optimistic and aggressive case that we could hit that would, be huge for everyone. So there's certainly sort of like personal learnings and playing the game, but also, what does it look like, right, to chart out my own style and to be just really upfront and unapologetic about who I am and how I want to grow this business and how I want to kind of approach this process. And that has been actually very empowering for me. And there's a long way to go. And I have a lot of things to say about sort of how the kind of venture capital ecosystem can better support, right, women and minorities, because even sort of the sort of like nice media, looking sort of like funds may not necessarily always even have the kind of like the legs and sort of opportunities to truly kind of support the company in a meaningful way. So there's a lot of kind of nuances in that needs to be changed. But I am kind of optimistic that, we have actually found a lot of great investors and partners. I'm really proud to say that our board now and, looking into the future is all run by women. And so, there's a lot of opportunity here. And I do see things kind of changing for the better. And I've just learned a lot about just embracing exactly who I am.
Whoever's coaching you did a good job, because you're really, really well-spoken and powerful personally. So it's impressive. And what are you finding? Just you're setting out on that journey.
Yeah, I would echo everything Michelle said. And I'll take just to not repeat everything she said, I'll take another angle of this space is our supply chain partners. And when I'm working with our dye house, when I'm at our cut and sew factories, those are also mostly all owned by men and multi-generational, family owned, passed down to the son. And so it's been really, I think I expected kind of the VC, you hear a lot about that. But then I think it's been really, really interesting to think about how I present myself with supply chain partners, especially as a startup where we need them more than they need us for some of our partners, that we need them to take a gamble on me. We're smaller volumes than most of their partners, so they need to believe in our mission and say, you're going to grow, and that's why we're taking you on. And so it's this interesting transition of kind of them almost seeing me like a daughter in a lot of cases, which is great for them to take me on, but then pivoting over time to seeing me as a co-CEO and a business partner. And so I think that transition has been really interesting from a supply chain perspective. Yeah.
Hey, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I noticed that she's really getting her sense of style, and she thinks a lot about what she's going to wear to school. And what would you tell your 15-year-old self? Because a lot of what you all are doing can be quite expensive, luxury goods or, higher end, quality organic clothing. And, what I'm encouraging her and what is actually coming naturally to her is thrifting, as well as, having clothes swaps. But I'm just curious what you all would say to these budding, fashion girls to avoid the fast fashion, and how can you kind of start curbing it early on?
I mean, thrifting is such a great trend that's happening, and you just have to encourage her that it's about creating her own style. I know I look at my daughter, and she's insecure about her own style, so it's easier to kind of copy what other people are doing. And I think that's where she gets into trouble and then has to get the same thing that other people are getting, and then that leads to fast fashion. So I think as much as you can encourage her to that what is cool about style is being an individual, and it is such an expression of individuality, and that's the best thing you could do for yourself, is to just create that and own it. And, the more you feel confident in it, the more you'll come off that way. So that's one thought.
I think also, I know not everybody likes to sew or make things like I do, but I think young girls can change clothing that they own and make it new again. So cut the sleeves off, cut the hem off, put new buttons on something, and it becomes a whole new thing again. And they can express themselves through doing things like that. So keeping a piece of clothing going longer by changing it slightly over time. And it's a really good challenge for them.
Can I add to that? I have a 13-year-old that has similar issues, and she came one day to me and said, "Mom, I'm done with all this," which was her entire closet. And I said, "All that?" She says, "Yeah, I'm not going to wear that anymore." And I said, "Okay." And she says, I want different stuff." And I said, "Okay, great. So you have to sell it, because how the hell are you going to buy all this closet?" And she said, "Well, how do I do that?" And I said, "Well, you have to take a picture of it. You need to do a marketing campaign. You need to put a price. You need to put it online. You have to drive marketing. You have to sell it, because, and that's easy. And it's great." So we did a photo shoot, and halfway, I'm done. Like, I'm not, and it went through, and eventually she came back to me. She was like, "This is so hard."
That's
I said,
a great
"Well,
lesson.
taught her about making money, about, getting rid of stuff. And I think it gave her a bit
It's
of
a
a
good
reality
idea.
check,
Yeah.
And I said, for everything you sell, you're gonna make money and you can buy some stuff. And it took forever. And she got, she realized how much this cost and how am I selling it for? And where's the value and why, and suddenly that pain, hardship, kind of, for her, I didn't have to say anything. She was like, "Oh my God, how can I reuse this? What am I going to do with this?"
Yeah.
And so it kind of helped. I don't know. Awesome.
That's great. Or the cost per wear.
Yeah, that's so
Tell them they got to, give them a goal for the cost per wear.
Have them make an Excel spreadsheet. where
Yeah.
they-
Early.
We have a question.
Yeah, this is a question for Jessica. because Pareto focuses on the basics and the fundamentals of a woman's closet, how do you still promote individuality and like fashion as a means of self-expression?
Really, really good question. So fashion, and I think we probably all agree in this room, it is an amazing way to express yourself. And like, we definitely want to make sure we stay true to that. And it's something I really believe and my co-founder really believes. And I think it comes down to realizing that the styling and how you carry it is what brings out the style. And brings out the individual aspect of it. And so that's why we really encourage our community to have those core wardrobe essentials, but then thrift a really cool denim jacket to throw on top of it. How you style it with your pieces in your closet is really what makes it different. And so I think that's where we say, we're not really a capsule wardrobe, which is, I think, a term that a lot of you are probably familiar with, where it's much more of a recipe and much more of a formula. And instead, we make the essentials that you then put your own spin on it, because to your point, it is so important that fashion remains it's a science, but it's also an art too, and it still needs to be an art.
We have a question back here.
I was wondering, as someone who is surrounded by social media and sees a lot of like different trends and different things, I find it very tempting to like go on to those sites like Shein because they're so inexpensive and they have all that clothes that everyone else is wearing. So, but I also find that sometimes even more expensive clothes can still not be like the most sustainable. How do I tell the difference from like even one a higher price? How do I tell the difference between fast fashion and more expensive?
That's a really good question, and I think one of the hardest questions to answer. There's so much greenwashing going on today that it's really hard for consumers like you to understand what they're buying and whether that company is telling the truth. We have to figure this one out, and the industry hasn't yet. But I think if you find a few brands that you can trust, then you should reward them for their good work by buying things from them. You can vote with your dollars.
It's also coming down to almost what you eat, right? You're looking at the labels, what's in the food. But the fashion industry doesn't have those requirements.
No, and the fashion industry has been working on this problem for many, many years. And it's an incredibly complicated thing to quantify the sustainability of a product in a way that everyone agrees upon. You're going to see it happen in Europe first, because governmental regulation in Europe is going to, there's a piece of legislation coming out of France that will require a label to disclose the environmental impacts of the thing you're buying.
But even that is really tricky, because I've just
It's very
learned
tricky.
that
It's not going to be
there's
perfect at all.
levels of kind of when a company talks about, this is created with zero emissions, it could be that they're talking about just their office buildings where they're selling. And I know Lululemon just got in hot water about the uniforms that they made for the Olympics, because they were citing that, and they were actually talking about literally just that piece of their production process, not the factories and how it got to the stores and all the other pieces of it. So it's
I
very
think
hard to
that's
discern.
part of the reason that it's going to come out of Europe, is that governmental regulation is that much more in Europe. And so government is going to try and put some scope around how people can disclose those impacts.
Smaller mass, every country is much smaller than the United States. So.
Yeah.
Let's just take one last question, you guys. You've been an awesome audience. Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming out. I was actually supposed to be here on Thursday, then I saw the panel. So I was like, I have to come because we just made an investment. with a family office based out of Berlin in sustainable clothing. So I was like, oh, perfect. So I'll just come to San Francisco early. So thank you guys very much. It's twofold question. First of all, with the jeans part, do you guys think it's time to get rid of the blue jeans? Because it's like 150 years old. It was made for like miners, but it was actually tent material. So it's like an accidental piece of clothing that's environmentally damaging. Is it time to get past that? And then second, how will we, because I'm invested in this, how will we dethrone probably the largest, most well-capitalized, entrenched capitalists, right? Which is the the cotton industry, and the apparel industry, and then the oil and gas to move it around, right? How do we dethrone those guys with all that firepower? Because it's going to be a fight, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll at least take the denim one to
denim.
start,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
can
yeah.
give like a couple, 2 cents on. So I think this is, the question about, well, should we get rid of it altogether? It's a complex one, and I feel like it's basically the, hey, can we take it, to the extreme of like, okay, well, if we only wear 80% of the, or 20% of our closets, do we not need accessories? And, if leather production is bad, can we just not do all of that? And I think, sort of too much reduction, right, is dangerous and challenging. What we're trying to get at here is, hey, well, we still need to wear clothes in our body. People love what they love. Like, people really love blue jeans. They have a sentimental attachment to the way that your jeans kind of wear in according to your life. And so even though it was originally like a, miner's kind of garment for, for being really sort of versatile and useful in that environment, like, people still love going around in our
Cost per
jeans.
wear, they do really, really well.
And exactly. And so I think for us as a company, and again, this is why we come down to like, well, we are remaking some of these materials and we're creating them as kind of drop-in replacements. Our approach is, well, how do we work within the system to help to reform the system so that the impact of creating something that the world loves can be that much less, so that and I don't think it's possible to ever not have trade-offs, but at least sort of have fewer kind of trade-offs in that process. And maybe my sort of response around sort of like, how do you work within the system, also sort of speaks to maybe my perspective on your second question around, yes, wouldn't it be nice to just sort of fully dethrone the large players, right? And and kind of remake the world again. But I think kind of practically speaking, my kind of approach is, well, why not make them allies, especially in the, places where you can. So, examples, traditional apparel companies, even the large fast fashion companies, not all of them are equal. Some of them truly are making, strong efforts to try to reform their supply chains. And, how do you work with them? How do you work with the existing kind of textile suppliers? Even how do you work with the existing chemicals companies who have, centuries of knowledge in this space around kind of how to use these materials, how to apply them, and a lot of great infrastructure so that we accelerate the process of transitioning into these better materials.
I think a really good example of that would be what we're doing right now. Our leather is finished in a traditional leather tannery. And people say, well, that's horrible. You're in there with all the animals. No, we have worked with that tannery owner. He sees the future of where leather is going. And he says, I want to train these people and use their vast knowledge of what they're doing and reapply it to the new solution. So that's using that infrastructure to go the right way.
Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. And just to give you an idea, I mean, these 3 women are absolutely amazing. And if you go out and start looking for women like this, there really are quite a lot of them. And when I set out to write my book, I was shocked not at how few there were, but really at how many. And there's very exciting technology, work, creativity going on in all parts of industry, in everything you can think of, in making glitter in new ways, in making food in new ways. Someone's opening a pizzeria to use ugly produce, putting, solar panels on, hundreds of thousands of homes, and geothermal energy, and making clothing out of plastic bottles. And I think that if you listen tonight, you should leave feeling hopeful. That's how I feel when I listen to you guys. That's how I feel when I read about these women in Girls Who Green the World. So I think we need to stay positive and look for the people who are looking for the solutions. And that's where we're going to do our best work for ourselves. So thanks, you guys.